Welcome to EdUp Curriculum. I am your host, Nicole Poff, and I am so excited about today's chat. We have with us Benjamin Rifkin from Fairleigh Dickinson University. I am so excited about this. Ben, we can call him Ben now. We've established his name. He's cool with us calling him Ben. So Ben, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited about this. I follow your president on social media, and we will talk about that, but big fan of the university and all the things you guys are doing, so I can't wait to showcase this here. But before we jump in, thank you for being here. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about yourself? Who are you, Ben?
Sure. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I am a guy who knew that he wanted to go to college and went to college with a very clear sense of what he wanted to do. I was absolutely certain I was going to major in history and go to law school. And freshman year, I took a course on history and loved it, loved the professor. Fall semester, then spring semester, another course with a different professor. Loved the course, loved the professor. But over summer, between freshman and sophomore year, I thought, I really want to study another foreign language. And I want to study a language that is different, is considered challenging, a language spoken by people that I'm being taught to hate as an enemy of the United States. And so that summer, I was making a decision between studying Russian or studying Chinese. And I flipped a coin and decided to go to Russian class on the first day and see what that was like, and Chinese on the second day, and then make my decision. Well, I never made it to Chinese. The Russian class on that first day was just so amazing, and I fell in love with it. And it awakened in me a passion I had no idea I had. A few weeks into the semester, my professor asked me to come see her in the office, and she said to me, "Ben, I want you to know that you can go as far in the study of this language as you want." And that got me thinking. And the first thing I thought was, well, maybe I'll major in this and go to law school. And at my alma mater at that time, you couldn't have a double major. So I was either going to major in history or major in Russian, but I couldn't do both. So I decided to change my major. And then later in the same semester, I decided I don't want to go to law school. I want to get a PhD and become a professor of Russian. And I did that. I'm a professor of Russian. And so, what that experience taught me was just how important mentoring of a faculty member can be, because I had no idea that I had this potential. And she saw that in me. The path for me from student of Russian to undergraduate student of Russian to graduate student of Russian to beginning assistant professor is one in which I became exposed to something very important in my field, in world language education, which is an organization called ACTFL, ACTFL, which has produced documents that provide world language educators with a framework for understanding the ways in which learners progress, gaining greater and greater skills to use the language that they're studying. And I soaked this up, found it fascinating. And I got very interested in assessing learning outcomes and in developing curricula and the learning tasks that we assign every day in our classrooms with an eye not towards covering content, but with an eye towards fostering the development of skills. And let me just give you an example of something. In the world language education field, we had a method that we use to teach languages. It's very outdated, that we call the grammar translation method. And some of your listeners will be familiar with its details. Basically, in the grammar translation method, we give students a text and they translate. And if you were learning to drive this way, you would study the manual and you would recreate the manual in different ways, but you would never have any experience sitting behind the wheel. Can you imagine how frightening it would be to drive anywhere in the world with roads full of drivers who had only studied the manual, right? So similarly, when we learn to swim, right? In higher education, most of our curricula, especially in the liberal arts, are designed around the context of transmitting knowledge rather than developing skills to be performed in authentic real life contexts. And so learning about this and becoming involved in curricular design and learning outcomes assessment basically put me on a trajectory for leadership in higher education. I started my career at the University of Wisconsin-Madison as an assistant professor, worked there for 15 years, tenure, promotion, department chair, that kind of thing. And then moved on to other institutions in leadership roles, vice dean, dean, provost. And now I am provost and senior vice president for academic affairs, essentially the chief academic officer at Fairleigh Dickinson University, where I'm just delighted to be focused on helping faculty understand how we might reconceptualize what it is we provide our students in the learning experience that we call higher education in the United States.
Ben, you're speaking my love language. You really are. I mean, I think this seems so obvious, but it's not, right? It's still very far away from being obvious. And I think I really figured it out. I worked a long, long, long time ago in career services, and I saw a theme of students graduating. They had job descriptions in front of them, and they would come to me and they'd say, Nicole, I didn't learn any of this. And I'm looking at the job description and I'm like, well, maybe technically you didn't learn some of it, but critical thinking, let's talk about that. Let's talk about those case studies that you did in your program, which I know you did. Let's talk about the skills that the case studies promoted. But there was never that connection made in the classroom, right? Like your case studies are building these skills. So you are speaking my love language because I've seen this on the students coming out of higher ed who are just so unaware of, like, sometimes we're not building the skills. Sometimes we just have to own we're not. But sometimes we are, and students just aren't even realizing it.
Well, I think it's really important for all of us in higher education and all of us in society to understand how we got to where we are with the system of higher education that we have in this country. So for the most part, the American college or university is a product of thinking about higher education that emerges out of late 19th century Germany, in particular Humboldt University in Berlin, which establishes the university first and foremost as a center for very high level research that focuses on the research work being conducted by the faculty with the support of graduate students. And I recognize the value of having some institutions in our system of higher education that are focused on that. And my undergraduate and graduate alma maters were both of that ilk. I did my bachelor's and first master's degrees at Yale University, one of our nation's oldest and most prestigious universities, and my second master's degree and my doctoral degree at the University of Michigan, which is considered one of our most important public research institutions in the country. And I'm very proud and grateful for the opportunities to have studied at those institutions. However, the vast majority of students who seek a college degree are doing so at institutions very different from Yale and Michigan. And one of the things that we need to bear in mind is that the Humboldt University model from late 19th century Germany has had a huge impact on all colleges and universities, and maybe with the exception of community colleges, but the four-year schools, in terms of how we think about prestige, how we think about moving up in the rankings. It has to do about research dollars, research publications, grants, patents, etc. And are those actually the most important thing for students who are not at an elite institution, who are looking at a college degree? Perhaps they are the first in their families to go to college, and the college degree as a ticket to a meaningful and fulfilling life in which they can move forward in terms of socioeconomic mobility. And so our question that we need to be asking in higher education is, how are our structures and systems designed to meet the needs of the students we have, as opposed to meeting the needs of the students we might think we would like to have, but who are attending other institutions if they can get into them. And this means really rethinking not only curricular design, but the whole faculty reward and incentive system. And I do want to point out that it is easier to count how many publications, how many grant dollars, how many patents a faculty member gets to determine whether or not to offer them tenure and promotion. And it is much more difficult to measure the efficacy of teaching. And here, let me just share with you one example.
Yeah.
When I was a graduate student teaching assistant at the University of Michigan, teaching Russian language, I was teaching in accordance with best practices at the time and still now of classes being conducted in the language. So you came to Russian class and we spoke in Russian. And one of my students, I was teaching a summer class, was from another institution where that was not the norm. It was with a third-year Russian class, so she'd had 2 years of Russian class talking in English about Russian grammar, right? Reading the driver's manual, not getting behind the wheel. And she was very unhappy in the class, very unhappy. And she made it very clear with her body language, her facial expressions, the rolling of the eyes, the sighs. She was not a happy camper. End of the summer program. My 16 students wrote their course evaluations. 15 of them thought that I walked on water, and one thought I was the Antichrist. Okay, fine. 6 months later, she's at my office, and I never expected to see her again because she was not one of my, she was not from the University of Michigan. So she made a trip in January to come see me. And she came into my office to talk, and she said, I just came back from study abroad in the Soviet Union, and I was the only person in my group who could speak Russian. And I realized it was because of your class. I said, I'm so glad to hear this. And she said, I wrote a terrible teaching evaluation of you. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. She said, I would like to retract it. I said, well, you can't because, they're anonymous. I said, if you want, you can write a supplementary letter and the chair will put it in my file. And she did that, and it was very nice. But my point is simply that sometimes the impact of successful teaching is not immediately transparent. And we need to recognize this. It's part of what makes the evaluation of teaching difficult. But just because something is difficult doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile and important to do. And I think that the most important measure of successful teaching is how it impacts our students. And not just today, but in the long term. In the long term, because it's easy to create a test that students can cram for and do well. It's much more difficult to create a learning experience that will have an impact on a student, not just this week, but for years to come. And how much more important is it to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Ben, I think that you are me in a different body, but a much more tactful me. Because I say all these things, but you have a way of making it seem very positive. I'm just like, higher ed, pull it together. Come on, like our systems. You put it very nicely. And I appreciate that. Yeah.
If I could just say one other thing in response to something that you said earlier, I think a lot of faculty teach courses in which they are teaching what we might call transferable or durable skills, like as you were mentioning with the case studies.
Yeah.
But we don't do nearly a good enough job of helping our students understand that
Yep.
what you've learned by doing this thing applies to the workplace in this way.
Yep.
And so one of the things we need to do in higher education is to, first of all, help faculty understand what they're already doing, how it can be communicated more accurately to the students so that they in turn can reflect that in their cover letters and their resumes and their interviews. And also to help other faculty understand other projects they could do that they're not doing that could have an impact on propelling our students into career trajectories to which our students aspire. So that's a sort of a twofold pathway for improvement.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I think, context is everything, right? Like assignment prompts are so often written from the perspective of a faculty who understands exactly the value of that assignment. But if we just back it up a smidge and we don't necessarily need to edit the content, academic freedom can stay intact, right? But if we layer in on top of the prompt that context, that's where we can really help students understand, where this all works together. But if we just say, do this, and they have no idea why they're doing it or what it means for their future, we're not really setting them up for that future success.
Absolutely, completely agree. There needs to be a why. But I want to add to this something else, which is a problem that we have in higher education more generally. So let's just talk for a moment about students at that transition point between high school and college, right? So it's June of their senior year, they're 18, and they've just finished up their K-12 experience. And then a few months later, they start college. They are not significantly intellectually or emotionally different 3 months later. But if they attended a public school for their K-12 experience, all of the teachers they had were probably licensed through a school of education and their state licensure board. And for that licensure, they had to take courses on pedagogy and adolescent development and curricular design and all of, how to assess student learning and all of these things. And then they get to college and they're being taught by faculty who have had none of that, and who are essentially licensed, if I can use that term, notice my air quotes here, to teach by virtue of the fact that they themselves have completed a very significant and important research project resulting in a dissertation. Now, I would like to share with you and your listeners a parallel. Look at my mouth. I have a mouth full of teeth, and yet I assure you that you do not want me to be your dentist.
That is a great one.
Just because I can write a book about Russian literature doesn't mean I know anything about how to teach students to learn Russian. So our graduate programs in the arts and sciences largely have absolutely no requirements and often no elective courses about how to design a class, how to teach a class, how to manage student behavior, how to deal with students who are not coping well, what to do in the classroom, how to create learning tasks that are meaningful. And so we need to provide more support for faculty on that basis. But the other thing to bear in mind is to examine closely the nature of graduate education in the arts and sciences. Because what we typically do in our doctoral programs in the arts and sciences is to prepare our faculty, our future faculty, to create courses and curricula that will prepare more faculty. So to get our undergraduate students ready to successfully apply for, gain admission to, and be successful in doctoral programs in the field. Now, two problems with this. First, there aren't nearly enough jobs in higher ed for all of our undergrads to become faculty. So It's an inappropriate goal that way. Number two, higher ed is shrinking. The number of students of college-going age who want to go to college is declining every year. So whatever number of positions there have been, as faculty are leaving those positions, retiring, unfortunately passing away, many of them are not being replaced, let alone all the programs that are being closed and the budgetary crises that we're experiencing. So there are ever fewer jobs for those faculty. Number three, the vast majority of our students are not interested in that option. They don't want to be professors.
Yeah.
And so instead of packing our courses with content, oh my God, you have to know all this stuff to be a professor of X. We should be thinking about designing our classes for skills. And if I may share with you a story of something that happened to me, I would love to just highlight this.
Yes, please do.
As I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, very early on in my study of Russian, before I'd completed the first semester, I had decided I wanted to be a professor of Russian. My motivation for studying Russian was sky high. I know a lot of students who want to get an A in the class. An A in my Russian class was not nearly good enough for me. I wanted to pass, and not just pass the class. I wanted to pass for Russian. I wanted to learn to speak Russian so well that Russians would think I was one of them. So my motivation was just sky high. Second year Russian I took in a summer program intensively. And in the course of that summer program, at one point, we were taught a group of about 10 words that are very old words in the language that behave archaically in a grammatical sense. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but any listener interested can find me and write me and ask me about the word, and I'd be happy to share it with them. Oh, but so I need to tell you that the word in question that I want to talk about is the word udder, as in the body part of a cow. Okay, and I just want your listeners to know that I grew up on the 11th floor. I am a very urban person. So cows and their body parts, not a part of my daily life. But I was so excited as a student of Russian in this course because these words were grammatically intricate. And I thought, as a professor of Russian, I have to know this. And this is just so much fun. And I love it. I'm so excited about it. Okay. That was in the summer of 1980. And I loved that class. And I loved that professor. And I was so happy. The next time I encountered that word was in January of 2025. And I was reading a depressing Russian novel and chuckled. And my wife was sitting next to me and she said, "Why are you laughing? I know that book is depressing." And I said, "I just read a sentence with the word utter. And it's the first time that I've encountered it in the wild since 1980. So we had a good laugh about that. And it really got me to thinking about the design of curricula because, having that word as something that we had to learn and memorize made sense for me as a future professor of Russian. And I was one of, I don't know, like 1% of the students in that program who had that ambition. And so it worked for me. I happened to be in touch with some of my classmates from that time. They didn't remember the word. It didn't have any salience for them. It was, but it just gave me pause to think about how we design curricula. Who are the curricula for? What are our goals in teaching our students? What should we be thinking about? And what was not part of that class, what did not inform that class was you're studying Russian to learn how to communicate successfully with Russians from a wide range of backgrounds with a wide range of purposes. And maybe some of you might become professors, as opposed to, well, this class is for future professors and the rest of you should just buck up. And that just has a huge impact on how I think about how we should be designing our curricula in the 21st century in the context of a rapidly changing marketplace in which our students emerge and must find not only a job, but a career trajectory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're fascinating to me because you came from an Ivy League, but you still very much have this student first mentality, right? And that's not always I am making an assumption here, probably a really bad one, but that's not always the case, right? Even faculty or provosts who didn't go to Ivy Leagues can sometimes, like you said, think that their students should be, at an Ivy League and act and treat their students like they're in an Ivy League. Your guys' motto, Fairleigh Dickinson's motto, is students first, right? What and I think you guys really mean it. Based on my conversations with you, based on the posts your president makes on LinkedIn, what does this phrase mean to you personally, and how does it inform your daily life as a provost?
Thank you. And before I answer, I just want to tell everybody who's watching this who might be intrigued. The president of Fairleigh Dickinson University is a man by the name of Michael Avaltroni. I'm saying that name slowly and I'll say it again. Avaltroni. Find him on LinkedIn because wow, is he great.
Oh, yes.
So every decision we make at Fairleigh Dickinson University has as the first question for consideration, how does this impact our students? And we also need to think about that from two different perspectives. So we want to consider the students who are with us today and the students who might come tomorrow and in the future. Because the students we have today do not include some students who can't be with us today because we haven't made the right decisions yet to make them feel welcome, to make them feel like this could be their home. And so we want to be sure to meet the needs of the students we have, but we also want to be ever more inclusive of the students we're missing right now who could benefit from the opportunities that we can offer them if we just make it so. And so what that means is that at every conversation about a policy change, about a curricular change, about a change in practices or procedures, we start with the question of what does this mean for the students we have and the students we could have? And part of that means thinking about who is at the table, what voices are being heard, what voices are not being heard, and how do we expand the voices at the table to make sure that we're hearing from everybody. And this has meant a complete reconceptualization of shared governance at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And if it's appropriate, I'll say a little bit about that.
I would love to. I would love you
Okay.
to.
Okay. So one of the things that affects virtually every American college and university is regional accreditation. And we were blessed with having our periodic regional accreditation from our accreditor, who is the Middle States Commission on Higher Education here in the Mid-Atlantic region, come and visit us in April of last year. And we've been working on preparing for that for about 2 years, which is kind of the way things fly in the world of higher ed. And I happened to enter into my role as first interim provost at the beginning of that 2 year period. And one of the things that I discovered was that our shared governance structure hadn't been revised since 1999, right? And this was 2023. Now, several years after 1999, our university opened up a new campus in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And the existence of that campus was nowhere reflected in our shared governance structure. Also excluded from our shared governance structure was any voice for professional staff or students. So I brought this information to our fabulous president and suggested that we create a task force to review shared governance, and he agreed to do that. So we did. So I convened a group of 9 individuals, 3 people from each of our 3 degree granting campuses, 2 in New Jersey, 1 in Vancouver. And each team of 3 from each of those campuses consisted of a faculty member, a staff member, and a student. And over the course of several months, we reviewed information on best practices in shared governance. We looked at shared governance models at other institutions that had won awards from the AAUP. And we revised, we started with a revision of our existing model and then decided to scrap it and create a new model, which we brought forward to the Faculty Senate, the Professional Staff Senate, and the Student Government for feedback, which we then incorporated in the model. And then we brought that model to the Board of Trustees in March of 2024, and the board approved it, and we launched that new model in the fall of 2024. And what this means is that now we have a structure and a system for engaging the voices of all of our stakeholders in any possible change, which means we hear from the students, from the faculty, from the staff on any possible change in a way that's very deliberative, very purposeful, very intentional. And that means that as it takes a little bit longer to get things done, but there's not a flip-flopping of, well, we're going to do this. Oh, wait a minute, we forgot to ask the students about what it means for them. Now we're doing that. Oh, but the staff say this. Now we're doing this. So I've worked in institutions that do that kind of flip-flop. This is much better, and it builds trust and respect. So this is part of our students first approach. Students have voice, and they're on the important committees through shared governance.
I love that because that's such a good example of literally giving students a seat at the table, right? Like we say it, but a lot of times our governance is set up to be a faculty governance system, right? And our faculty can literally veto, and everything could die on the vine. If faculty say, no, this disrupts my life too much, right? This would be extra work. I'm research heavy. I don't have the time for all these extra things. So we're just going to say no because it's how it's always been. Faculty have so much control. And so I love students, but I also love staff because I feel like a lot of times our advising teams, our enrollment teams, our career services teams, they all have such a strong pulse on the student needs. And sometimes they can advocate really well for our students, but they need a seat at the table too.
Well, it's beyond the advocacy. It's the professional staff see things that the faculty don't. And we need to have the voices of the professional staff in the conversation because the faculty are sometimes simply not aware of things that the staff are seeing. I want to point out that in the history of American higher education, staff started out as very low-level appointees who had no voice, and there were no expectations that they had any kind of special expertise. But as American institutions of higher education have evolved, so too have the staff positions. And now we have people in these staff positions with very high levels of expertise. And we are absolutely foolish to ignore that expertise and that experience. And of course, that caring and that commitment. And when you ask students about who are their go-to people on campus, we hope that they're going to name some faculty, but they're often going to name coaches and advisors and directors of offices that they go to when they're having a hard time and they don't know what to do. And so not listening to those people is a tremendous mistake on the part of institutions. One other thing I want to say about shared governance is that in the norms of American higher education and at Fairleigh Dickinson University, there are certain topics that are considered to be properly the domain of the faculty and the faculty either exclusively or almost exclusively. And our new shared governance system changes nothing about that. The faculty control the curriculum. The faculty control the tenure and promotion process. So there's no changes to that. But for instance, recently we made a change in a policy about when in the year you can change a prerequisite for a course. Because it used to be, whenever you feel like it. So in the middle of registration for the next semester's classes, a department could change a prereq, and a student who was thinking they could take class X all of a sudden can, and this disrupts their progression towards completion of their degree. So we had a conversation in shared governance about whether or not to create a policy to say that you can approve a change to a prereq at any time, but can only go into effect at these intervals. And the people who weighed in on that included not just faculty, but professional staff and students. And it passed. And everybody, one of the important things about our shared governance structure, and I believe the important shared governance, the most successful shared governance structures, is that these conversations about the perspectives of students and staff are not happening in isolation. It's the students, staff, and faculty in the same room listening to each other so that a faculty member can hear, oh, this doesn't work for you, students, if we do it this way? Tell me more. So that people of goodwill can hear from one another as opposed to having those conversations happening in separate rooms. They are together because we are one community.
I think that's vital. I think that's so vital because a lot of times, I'm going to go back to staff kind of advocating for students. I think sometimes it's like, you may be just talking about one student there, right? And so we are relying a lot of times on staff, specifically coaches, advisors, to really relay the message. But then sometimes it's also doubted on the other side of that, right? Because it's secondhand information. So giving those students the seat to confidently speak on kind of the student population, I think it's just really good. It's a really good approach.
It is. And I just got to tell you that also one of the hallmarks of a successful shared governance structure is that the individuals who participate in the structure from each of the stakeholder groups are chosen by the stakeholder groups themselves. So it's not me as provost cherry picking the students who are going to participate in these committees. No, student government does that. And the professional staff senate picks the people who are going to be the staff members on these committees, and the faculty senate does the same. So, and then we come together with an expectation of goodwill and trust and respect and learn from one another. And then the solutions we come to are informed by these perspectives, which make them simply better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, I mean, if everyone has a seat, then you can collectively figure out a solution that works for all versus just one group. Or having to think about things from the perspective of a different group who's not even there.
Which is such a great life experience,
yeah.
right? In terms of, preparing you for a job and a career trajectory.
Yeah.
Other thing I want to say about this is that also sometimes the decisions that are ultimately made through shared governance are not exactly the most ideal outcome for one or another member of the community or stakeholder group, but everyone understands how we got there.
Yep.
Right? It was in conversation, listening, consultation. My voice was heard. Ultimately, the decision was made that was not my preferred decision, but I saw how we got there.
Yep.
And that just creates a sense of trust and respect for the process. So it's really important and valuable for communities and communities that have good, high functioning shared governance systems avoid really contentious episodes on campus with occupations and demonstrations and nastiness, because if we're all sitting down and talking with one another and listening, there's a venue for us to air our grievances and share our disagreements and work together to a jointly arrived at compromise.
And it's such a good skill to build for students.
Yes.
When I was an undergraduate, my degree was child development, and I was in maybe a divorce class. I don't know. But I was in a class, and this seems so obvious now, but we were talking about childhood violence and how so much of the violence stems from lack of communication, and not necessarily communicating like yelling, but the lack of the ability to communicate, especially in kind of those low income areas where students didn't learn the skill of communication. They don't even have necessarily the language, like literally the words in which they could resolve conflict. Violence becomes a way that they handle conflict or, communicate, right? Violence becomes a way they communicate. And so as I think about, the world and our students and just these times, like the skills of giving students the ability to advocate for themselves and then also communicate what they want, I think is just a way in which we can better position the world really long term.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I'll just also extend that what you described as being a phenomenon that might occur with some frequency at lower socioeconomic levels. My impression is that it's at all socioeconomic levels. Wealthy families demonstrate sometimes the very same patterns. The accoutrements and the manifestations of wealth may be different in the background, but the bigger issues are still just the same and just as salient.
This is true. Yeah. This is so correct. It just looks differently across.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, you're right. All right. I'm going to move us gears a little bit because there's some topics that I still want to make sure we cover.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, when you and I first were talking, something you said I really loved, which is faculty can sometimes confuse rigidity with rigor, which I totally agree with. I think yes to that. Can you unpack that for us a little bit? What does that mean?
Sure. It's really easy to create hard and fast rules, but life actually is very complex and very nuanced. And not only do we ourselves as faculty have to be ready to deal with nuance, but we need to model that for our students to prepare them for successful lives. And I just want to give you an example of something that happened in my career. Um, I never had a policy in my syllabus about food in the classroom because it was never a problem until one day I was teaching a class and a student came in with a plate of spaghetti and meatballs. And I just want to have your listeners picture this, okay? He comes in, it's one of those, round dishes that it's like foil with a crimped top,
Yep.
right? And he opens it up on his desk, and he's got a napkin that he puts on his collar, and a fork and knife, and class starts at 1:30, and he's eating this, in class. He's having lunch. It's not like a little granola bar kind of thing, and I'm just, and it's a Russian class, we're supposed to be talking, and his mouth is full. Anyway, so I thought, well, I spoke with him afterwards, never again, and he agreed and he apologized. Okay, and then my policy starting next year was you can't have food in class. And then I have a student who comes to me and says, I have a problem with this. I said, talk to me, and she said, so I have diabetes, I have glucose management issues, and I'm going to need to periodically nibble on a granola bar, have some raisins. I said, absolutely. Absolutely. You do that, right? And it just made me realize that, this big policy I had of no food was not going to work, right? Or another policy of no phones in class. Well, then I had a student whose wife was 9 months pregnant, so I just came to understand that every policy we can come up with has to have room for exceptions. Yep. Another example. I just want to first start with a faculty example and then a student parallel. I'll start with student parallel and then faculty example. Student comes to the professor and says, I can't be in class on Tuesday, I have to have an MRI. What I want the professor's response to be is, I'm so sorry, because when a student says they have to have an MRI, this is not for a hangnail.
No.
Right? Yeah. This is, there's something serious going on. But the professor in this particular situation said, well, if our class meets on Tuesday, why can't you have your MRI on Wednesday? Do you know what the American healthcare system is? Let me tell you what the MRI is. That's when you show up.
Yep.
And again, this is not to treat a hangnail, okay? So, think about that. And then think about the alternative situation of faculty member contacts chair of the department and says, I have to have an MRI on Tuesday, so I won't be able to teach my class. Is there anybody who can teach it for me? Or I'll cancel class and we'll do a makeup, right? And of course, the answer is, yeah, we'll cover for you. So what I want for all of our faculty to do is to extend to their students the same kind of consideration, empathy, and compassion that our faculty expect from their colleagues, their chairs, and their deans. And then I also want us to be thinking about how we construct our courses. One of the wonderful things about life in the 21st century is that the volume of knowledge is expanding geometrically at a fantastic rate. This is particularly the case in our natural science classes, where the information available about biology, chemistry, physics, like every day, it's just volumes more. But our students taking intro or intermediate biochem physics are still getting 3 or 4 credits with the expectation of how much work that means in class, out of class, in the lab, right? And so what's been happening around the country is that faculty members are stuffing more content in, but the human brain can only assimilate so much. We in higher ed are just so much better at addition. We need to also think about subtraction. What are we going to take out to make room for something new? And how are we going to think about restructuring our curricula and our learning tasks to move our framework away, our paradigm away from the transmission of knowledge to be regurgitated at the lowest levels of Bloom's taxonomy, asterisk, I'll come back to Bloom's taxonomy in a moment, to the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy of evaluation, analysis, synthesis, creation. And we need to think about shifting our paradigm away from memorization and regurgitation to the development of skills and attitudes and motivation. Now, all of those individuals who get licensed to teach K-12 are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, but far too few of the faculty who teach at the college and university level are. And so for those of you listening to this podcast right now, if you've never heard of Bloom's taxonomy, Google it. Bloom, like the bloom on a flower. Bloom's taxonomy. Levels of thinking. And think about what tasks you're assigning your students that are at the lowest levels and what are at the highest levels. And what I would argue is that lower level work is important and cannot be ignored.
Yep.
But if we stop there, we fail to motivate our students. We fail to prepare them for a meaningful career trajectory. We need to motivate our students with the exciting work of analysis, evaluation, and creativity. And that's at the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. So I really encourage faculty to make room in their curricula, in their class hours in the classroom, to do that work, which prioritizes synchronous human interaction. This means not lecturing all the time, which is a unidirectional delivery of transmission of information, to actually capitalizing on the fact that here we are, 25, 50, 100 people coming together at this one time in this one place. Let's share with one another. Let's learn from one another. Let's interact in a way that creates something bigger and better than anything we could have done in a unilateral transmission of information.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about we're good at addition. We need to get better about subtraction. I have a story. One time I was working with a faculty member, and it was a nursing program, and they were taking an exam, a really important exam that kind of predicted how well they would do on like their state boards. And so she said, we're going to make this exam worth 35% of their final grade because students aren't taking it seriously enough. Okay, fine. But that same week they take that exam, they also have 4 other assignments in this class to turn in. So upping the percentage doesn't give them more space in their time, right?
It
You're not
does give
like,
them more stress.
yeah, and they're probably gonna do worse on these, they don't even know what to prioritize. They're gonna prioritize the 35%, yes, but they don't magically have 10 more hours in their week to dedicate. So what can we remove to give them the space to, let them do well on this exam that is now so heavily staked? I understand the importance of it, but we got to remove. And I love the way you frame that.
I see so many course syllabi, that assign so much reading that it is absolutely impossible for students to do it all, assimilate it in a meaningful way, and come to class to discuss.
Yep.
You know, a book that had a really profound impact on me that I think is not at all outdated, even though it's been a bunch of years since it came out, is a book called My Freshman Year by Rebecca Nathan. And Rebecca is spelled Rebekah, Rebecca Nathan. She's an anthropologist. She got permission from her university to move into a dorm and to pretend to be an older student as a freshman. And she wrote an anthropological study of freshmen in her dorm. And it was just revelatory for me, as it is for many readers, to see how students who have so many competing priorities that they have to attend to manage to juggle them and to have a better understanding of what it means when they come to our classes unprepared because we've created unreasonable expectations and we're not being mindful of everything else that's going on in their lives. And I'm not suggesting that we completely water down our curricula and just serve cookies and drink coffee and eat cookies in class. But there are things that we can do to make our classes more meaningful and to reduce the burden on our students so that they can really actually have the liberty to focus instead of having a sense of panic of trying to get everything done, that they can't possibly get everything done. And they're always having to decide, I'm simply not going to do this. I'm not going to do that, which means in many cases, not doing the reading
Yep.
because they know from experience that if they don't do the reading and they show from class, they'll be able to learn something from listening to what other people say in class, and they'll benefit from the free writer approach, and then cram for a final exam. Is that the way to structure a meaningful, powerful experience in higher education? I don't think so. So this book, I highly recommend it. My
Oh,
Freshman Year by Rebecca Nathan.
I'm gonna look that up because I resonate with like that. I feel that deeply. I worked 40 hours. I went to San Diego State. I worked 40 hours a week, and I took 15 to 18, actually sometimes 21 units at a time. And so I literally didn't read the textbooks, and it wasn't because I was lazy. I mean, I truly would go to work from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., go to class 5 to 10, and then somewhere between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., I would have to eat dinner eat food for the first time all day and do my homework. And then I would get
And sleep.
very little sleep. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you had to do that too.
I had to
So,
figure that somewhere.
unfortunately, Nicole, your experience is not that unusual. It certainly was not my experience because I went to an institution that was able to provide me with the financial support I needed to not have to do that.
Yep.
But what you are describing is far more common for today's students than what my experience was. But far too often, the curricula that our students are experiencing in their colleges and universities around the country are not equipped to meet the needs of students in that kind of situation.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Well, I want to give you a chance here to highlight some of Fairleigh Dickinson's just positionality in the space because I think, again, I've already kind of girl fanned you guys a little bit. Um, what's a change that you're most proud of, at FDU? Like being thinking about it being a truly centered university, like what are you proud of that you guys have done recently?
Sure. Well, I've already mentioned shared governance, so I just want to put that in the docket in this category, but I won't talk about it anymore because we already have. So we've had a couple of initiatives over the course of the last couple of years that are unfolding that I'm really proud of, and I'll just share a little bit about them. with the understanding that, we've had some progress in these areas and we're excited about having more progress. So first, we're really excited about our work in the area of COIL, which is an acronym standing for Collaborative Online International Learning. So what this means is that we have faculty at Fairleigh Dickinson who are partnered with faculty at other institutions around the world. And a class at FDU is linked to a class somewhere else. And the students in the two classes share a project that they work on in either pairs across the oceans, or small groups where there are a couple students on one side of the ocean and a couple students on the other. And they work together, and then they submit their project to their two faculty members who have worked in advance at the beginning of the semester to ensure that the criteria for assessment of the project are the same. So the students are working towards the same goals, as opposed to like, well, I have to have this red because if it's not red, I'll fail. And the other student says, well, I have to have it blue because if it's not blue, I'll, so everybody's agreed on, on the criteria. We've just had terrific success with COIL. The students love it. It's project-based learning that embeds in it collaboration, intercultural understanding. And I just want to have a shout out from one of our faculty members who's just been quite a hero in this. Her name is Dr. Kara Alaimo. She teaches communication, and she's done a terrific project with a colleague in Turkey. We have increased our efforts in having field placements and internships, not only in the expected areas of nursing and allied health, pharmacy, business, graduate psychology, but also in many other fields. And we've restructured our course numbering system so that it's easier for us to track participation in these experiences, because we know that they build skills for the job and career trajectory. We're working on enhancing opportunities for undergraduate research, not only in the more traditional areas of biology, chemistry, computer science, engineering, but also in other areas, including humanities, communication, arts, social sciences. And I'd also, like to say that, what I think is just so important for us is that we have a growing sense at Fairleigh Dickinson University of the importance of putting caring for students at the center of what we do. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is that in our criteria for tenure and promotion, we have a category that's called caring for the welfare of students. So at most universities around the country, there's research, there's teaching, and there's service.
Yep.
And we have also caring for the welfare of students.
I love that.
Proud.
I love that. I really love that. That is so radically different. I love that. And again, when I met you, I was like, so I follow your president on LinkedIn. Is this real? Like, could there be a university that really cares about their students that much? One of the big debates online right now, I mean, in higher ed, is do we need to start new? Or can we change a university, change the chains that sometimes, chain us down to like legacy tradition? Can we change those enough to truly be student-centered? And I think you guys are answering and giving hope for people who I know listen to this, who read my Substack, who interact with my LinkedIn posts, who are constantly saying all the examples that were given of schools that are really leading the way, they started brand new. But what about something that's not new? How can we bring that into today's world? And you guys are doing it.
Thank you, Nicole. I'd like to, share just one thought about change. I'm going to be honest with you that I have been honest throughout this interview, but I want to be honest with you on this. I don't think that we could have embraced change as thoroughly as we have if we had not been cornered by significant market forces and changes in the higher ed environment that gave us no other choice. And right now, I think you'd have to be an ostrich with your head in the sand if you were not aware about the perfect storm that higher ed is finding itself in. And I won't go through all the factors of that storm. People know what they are. But I do want to say this. Institutions that resist change at this particular point in their history are at risk of becoming history, of closing. And the number of colleges and universities that have closed in the United States over the last couple of years is record-breaking, and I anticipate that there will be more to come. At FDU, we've taken a different path. We've chosen not to become history, but to make history. And we are embracing change consultatively, collaboratively, based on our read of evidence in a very transparent way. And I just could not be prouder of our university community, led by our outstanding president, Michael Aveltroni, the faculty, led by their faculty senate, our staff, led by their professional staff senate, our students in the student government, and our alumni, coming together to make transformative change that is positioning our institution to make history. A couple of years ago, it was just a crazy thing that our men's basketball team made it into the NCAA, and we, the 16th ranked team, defeated first ranked Purdue. And one of the commentators at that game said, "F, do you believe it?" And I'm telling you, F, do you believe it? We are happening, and I am so proud to be a member of this wonderful community and to serve with the president, to serve with the faculty, staff, and students as we recreate what it means to be a student-centered institution of higher education, where we deliver on our promise to make our education available for students in a way that has an impact on them personally, globally, and transformationally.
I love it. We're going to end there. Ben, thank you so much for being here. I can't believe we've already flown through an hour. This was probably like the fastest feeling interview I've ever done, because it's just been so much fun. So thank you for just sharing, your stories, your experience, your heart for the field, the way in which FDU is leading. I'm so grateful, and I feel like there's a lot of good here for the listeners who are wrestling with how do we keep the students first in a system that feels like it doesn't value them. So I so greatly appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.